The night security shift, it was past midnight when Daniel locked the side door of the office building and settled into his chair at the security desk. His shift was always quiet, too quiet most nights. The company was a corporate hub, 13 floors of glass, steel, and fluorescent-lit hallways that hummed with life during the day but became unsettlingly hollow after 10 p.m. At night, every creak of the vents and flicker of the lights seemed amplified. The sound of the elevator cables shifting in the shaft carried faintly through the lobby, echoing like distant footsteps. He had worked here for 6 months, and though he had convinced himself he was used to the silence, something always gnawed at him when the hour crept past midnight. Tonight, that unease felt sharper. Daniel adjusted the small monitors stacked in front of him, each showing a grainy feed from the security cameras. The screens cycled through empty cubicles, darkened hallways, and silent stairwells. His coffee steamed beside him, but he hadn't touched it in a while. Instead, he found himself staring at the cameras too long, expecting, almost waiting, for something to shift in the corner of one of those dimly lit frames. He shook his head, reminding himself it was just another long night. Yet, the feeling persisted, like someone unseen was lurking just beyond the camera's reach. Around 1:30 a.m., the elevator light on the far wall blinked on. Daniel leaned forward. He hadn't called it, and no one else should have been in the building. The elevator hummed softly as it made its way down, stopping at the lobby with a metallic ding. The doors opened slowly. Empty. Daniel exhaled a shaky laugh, muttering, "Faulty wiring again." He made a note in the logbook, as protocol demanded, but his hand trembled slightly as he wrote. He told himself it was nothing. Elevators sometimes misfired. But when the doors closed again, the display above the elevator flickered strangely, the numbers climbing up floor by floor, as if someone invisible had stepped inside and pressed a button. The monitors crackled, and Daniel's eyes darted back to them. On the 7th floor feed, he thought he saw a shadow move across the office hallway. It was quick, a dark blur that seemed to vanish as soon as it appeared. He leaned closer, rewinding the grainy footage, but the camera playback showed nothing, just the same lifeless stretch of carpet and cubicles. He sat back, heart beating faster now. Was it his imagination? He told himself it was a glitch, but the silence of the lobby around him suddenly felt heavier, pressing down like unseen eyes were watching from every corner as the hour dragged on. Daniel found himself listening more than watching. The hum of the vending machine by the break room, the faint ticking of the clock above his desk, the way the building seemed to breathe through its ducts and vents. Then he froze. From somewhere above, a door slammed shut, echoing down the stairwell like a thunderclap. He jerked toward the sound, his coffee spilling over his notes. The cameras flickered again, static distorting the images for just a moment before clearing. On the 10th floor feed, one of the office doors, one Daniel knew for certain had been locked hours ago, was hanging slightly ajar. A cold sweat prickled at the back of his neck. He wasn't alone in the building anymore. The 10th floor door. Daniel stared at the monitor, fixated on that single door on the 10th floor that now hung slightly open. He knew the office layout well, row after row of cubicles, a long hallway leading to the conference rooms, and that specific door leading to a private executive office. He had locked it himself at the start of the night. The thought of someone slipping in unnoticed sent a chill crawling down his spine. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, chalking it up to a malfunction or oversight. But the company's policy was strict. Every unexplained anomaly had to be investigated in person. With a reluctant sigh, he clipped his flashlight to his belt, logged the incident, and pushed away from the desk. The elevator was out of the question. He wasn't about to ride up in the same lift that had already acted on its own. Instead, Daniel made his way toward the stairwell. The heavy door groaned as he pushed it open, and the sound echoed into the hollow shaft. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and cleaning chemicals, its concrete walls lined with buzzing fluorescent lights that flickered more than they glowed. His boots thudded against the steps, each footfall bouncing up and down the shaft, reminding him how alone he was in this cavernous structure. By the time he reached the 10th floor landing, his breathing had grown shallow, as though the air itself felt heavier here. He pushed open the stairwell door and stepped into the corridor. The difference was immediate. While the lobby and lower floors had retained a faint warmth from the day's activity, the 10th floor felt unusually cold, the air sharp and still. The overhead lights hummed with low electricity, but every other bulb seemed weaker here, casting shadows that left the hallway patchy and uneven. Daniel's flashlight cut through the dimness as he walked, sweeping over rows of empty cubicles. Every chair was tucked in, every computer dark, perfectly normal, except for the sound. It was faint, but unmistakable. A soft tapping, like fingertips drumming against a desk. Daniel froze, flashlight beam trembling as he pointed it toward the source. The sound stopped instantly, leaving behind a silence that was somehow worse. His throat went dry. He forced himself to keep moving, every nerve screaming at him to turn back. Finally, he reached the office with the door ajar. Slowly, cautiously, he placed his hand against it and pushed it open. The hinges whined, and the room was revealed. A standard office, desk neatly arranged, blinds drawn. Empty. Daniel stepped inside, scanning every corner. Nothing out of place. Nothing alive. He let out a long, shaky breath, half laughing at himself. But then he noticed it. The blinds weren't just drawn. They were pressed against the glass, as though someone had been peering through them only seconds ago. He approached the window slowly, peeking through the slats at the dark cityscape outside. That's when he saw it in the glass reflection. Not his own figure, but another, taller silhouette standing just behind him, perfectly still in the middle of the office. His flashlight beam snapped around, empty air. Nothing there. The office was as lifeless as before, but the reflection burned into his mind, as though it had been waiting for him to look. The locked files. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears as he stepped back from the window. The reflection had been too clear, too solid to dismiss as a trick of the glass. Yet the empty office around him left no trace of the figure. His flashlight beam darted across the room again. Desk, chairs, bookshelves, nothing. Still, every instinct told him he wasn't alone. He steadied his breathing, forcing himself to calm down. It's just the hours, the stress, the mind playing tricks. But even as he tried to rationalize, his hand lingered on the handle of the office door, half expecting it to be pulled shut from the other side. When he finally stepped back into the hallway, Daniel noticed something else. The once-ajar office door wouldn't close properly now. He pushed it, but the latch no longer clicked shut. It simply drifted back open, as though the frame itself resisted sealing off the room. Irritated and unsettled, he jotted another note into his incident log. Company policy demanded everything be reported. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging thought that leaving it ajar was like leaving an invitation behind. A way for something, or someone, to keep moving freely. Back in the lobby, Daniel reviewed the security feeds again. His eyes immediately locked onto the 10th floor camera. The office he had just left now appeared completely dark, but on the grainy monitor, something strange caught his attention. The faint outline of a figure leaning over the desk. At first, he thought it was a smudge or distortion. But then it moved. A long, deliberate motion, like someone rifling through the drawers. Daniel leaned closer, breath catching in his throat. The drawers in that office were supposed to be locked, and only management had the keys. Whoever, or whatever, was up there now was searching for something. The sound of static crackled from the intercom at Daniel's desk, startling him so badly he nearly knocked over his coffee again. The intercom hadn't been used in months. It was practically obsolete. But now, faint and garbled, a voice hissed through the line. "Down here, can you hear me?" The words were barely audible, warped like they were being dragged through interference. Daniel snatched the receiver, his voice tight. "Hello? Who is this? Identify yourself." Silence. Just the hollow hiss of static. Then, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the intercom, deliberate and slow, as if someone was rapping their knuckles against the microphone. Daniel set the receiver down with shaking hands. The elevator chimed again, startling him from his frozen state. The doors opened, revealing nothing but the empty, humming interior. Yet this time, a thin folder sat neatly in the middle of the floor, its manila cover unmarked. Daniel approached cautiously, crouching down to pick it up. The folder felt cold in his hands, far colder than paper should. He opened it slowly. Inside were old employee records, names, photos, and dates of employment, all from years before his time. But one record was different. A black and white photo of a man in a suit, his face obscured by a blur in the image, as if the camera had failed to capture him properly. Below it, typed in bold, "Status, Deceased, found on premises, 10th floor. The man in the photograph Daniel sat frozen at the security desk, the folder spread open before him. His eyes kept drifting back to the blurred face in the black and white photograph. The typewritten line beneath it felt heavier than any words he had ever read. Status: deceased, found on premises, 10th floor. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. No one had mentioned this in his training. No one had ever said that a man had died in the building. Suddenly, the reflection, the slamming door, the cold air, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle snapping together. He flipped through the other documents in the folder, hoping for more clarity. Most of the records were routine, hire dates, job titles, employee IDs. But this man's file was thinner, almost intentionally so. The only personal detail was a name, printed in bold block letters at the top of the first page. Edward Mallory. Daniel whispered it under his breath, testing the weight of it. It sent an odd shiver through him, as though the building itself reacted to the sound. The lobby lights above him flickered once, then steadied. He closed the folder quickly, his instincts telling him he had uncovered something he wasn't meant to. Daniel's eyes darted back to the monitor showing the 10th floor feed. His stomach lurched. The office door was now wide open, the interior pitch black. And there, standing in the threshold, was a tall, distorted silhouette. Not quite a shadow, not quite a man. Its edges blurred, as though the camera couldn't focus on it properly. It didn't move, didn't pace or shift. It simply stood there, facing directly toward the camera. Daniel's hand hovered over the desk phone, ready to call someone, anyone, but his fingers froze. Who would he call? Who would believe him at this hour? Then came the sound. A deep, dragging noise, like heavy furniture scraping across the floor above him. Daniel flinched, every muscle in his body tightening. He grabbed his flashlight and rose from the desk, unwilling but compelled to see for himself. His boots echoed against the marble lobby floor as he made his way to the stairwell again. This time, the silence inside the stairwell was suffocating. Each floor he passed seemed darker than the last, the fluorescent bulbs dimming as though something was following his ascent. When he reached the 10th floor landing, he paused, heart pounding in his chest. The air seeping through the door was freezing, unnatural. With a shaky hand, he pushed the stairwell door open. The hallway was wrong. The lights above flickered violently, buzzing so loud it sounded like hornets trapped in the ceiling. And at the end of the hallway, the office door stood open like a gaping mouth. Daniel raised his flashlight. For a fraction of a second, it caught something inside the office. A man in a suit, standing unnaturally still, head tilted sharply to one side, face obscured in shadow. But then, as the light trembled in his hand, the figure seemed to dissolve into the darkness, leaving only the sound of a soft, deliberate whisper that drifted down the hallway. Mallory. Confrontation in the hallway. Daniel's heart pounded as the whisper faded into silence. The sound hadn't come from inside his head. He was certain of that. It had carried through the hallway, cold and real, brushing against his ears as though someone had leaned in close. He kept the flashlight fixed on the open office door, his grip slick with sweat. For a moment, the light trembled too much to focus, and he nearly dropped it. The rational part of him screamed to leave, to call the police, to walk out of the building and never return. But something heavier, a mix of duty and morbid curiosity, kept his feet planted. He took a cautious step forward. The carpet underfoot muffled the sound, but he swore he could hear another set of footsteps matching his pace, trailing just behind him. Every time he paused, the echo paused too. He tried to trick it, took one step forward, then two backward. The sound matched exactly, mocking his efforts. His breathing quickened. He swung the flashlight over his shoulder. Empty air, just the endless stretch of cubicles and shadows. But the weight of being watched was undeniable. When he reached the office doorway, Daniel paused again. The door was wider now than he remembered, though it splintered slightly near the hinges, as if it had been forced open from the inside. His flashlight beam swept across the interior. Empty desk, neatly stacked files, blinds drawn tight. Nothing, just as before. Yet the air inside the room pressed down on him like thick fog. He stepped inside, one hand brushing against the cold metal filing cabinet for balance. That's when the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening crack. Daniel spun around, flashlight beam flaring across the doorframe. The handle rattled under his grip, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped, his chest tightened, panic clawing at his throat. Then came the sound again, that dragging, heavy scrape across the floorboards, but this time inside the office with him. The beam of his flashlight darted wildly until it caught the far corner of the room. There, slowly emerging from the shadows, was the silhouette of the man in the suit, the blurred, faceless figure from the photo. Edward Mallory, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his outline flickering like static on a broken screen. Daniel's breath caught as the figure took a step forward, and then another. The light flickered, and for the first time, Daniel saw its face. Not blurred, not obscured, hollow. Empty sockets where eyes should have been, mouth frozen in a wide, silent scream. The sight froze Daniel to the spot, paralyzing him with raw terror. Mallory leaned closer, so close Daniel could hear the faint, wet rasp of breath escaping from that gaping mouth. Then, in a voice stretched and broken like static through the intercom, it spoke one word: stay. The flight Daniel's entire body locked up as Mallory leaned closer, the word stay still hanging in the air like a command. His flashlight flickered violently, the beam struggling to hold against the thick shadows filling the office. For a moment, Daniel was rooted to the spot, breath coming in shallow gasps, unable to tear his eyes away from the hollow face in front of him. Then, with a surge of desperate instinct, he slammed his shoulder into the office door. The handle groaned in his grip, finally giving way. The door burst open, and Daniel stumbled into the hallway, the heavy slam behind him reverberating like a gunshot. He sprinted down the corridor, flashlight beam bouncing wildly across cubicles and carpet. The buzzing lights overhead flickered in a strobe-like rhythm, disorienting him. And with each pulse of darkness, Mallory appeared again, standing at the far end of the hall, then suddenly closer, then right beside him, always frozen when the lights returned. Daniel's chest heaved, his lungs burning as he pushed himself faster, but the figure never seemed to tire, never seemed to move naturally. It was there and not there, always one step from closing the distance. Daniel burst through the stairwell door, letting it slam behind him. He threw himself down the steps two at a time, his boots striking the concrete with sharp, panicked thuds. The stairwell lights above him flickered out one by one, chasing him downward like a predator snapping its jaws. His breath echoed harshly off the walls, but beneath it, another sound followed, slower, heavier footfalls, as though something immense and deliberate was descending after him. Each step reverberated through the steel and concrete. Closer, closer, closing the gap to be by the time Daniel reached the 7th floor landing. His legs screamed with exhaustion. He fumbled for the door handle, nearly wrenching his wrist as he pulled it open and shoved himself into the hallway. This floor was darker, emptier, colder. His flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating the rows of cubicles like a maze. He ducked between them, crouching low, trying to quiet his ragged breathing. For a few agonizing moments, there was silence. No footsteps, no dragging sounds, just the hum of the failing lights above. He dared to hope he'd lost it. Then the overhead lights buzzed, and every computer monitor in the office flickered on at once. Dozens of screens glowed across the cubicles, casting pale light into the shadows. And on every single monitor was the same image, the blurred black and white photo of Edward Mallory, his hollow face staring out. Daniel's stomach twisted. Then, in perfect unison, the speakers of each computer crackled to life, and that same distorted voice filled the room. Stay, stay, stay. The word repeated, louder each time, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate with it. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't just in the room anymore. It was inside his head. The chase Daniel bolted from the cubicle row, his heart hammering as the chant of stay, stay, stay reverberated from every monitor. He ran blindly toward the far exit, his flashlight beam cutting shaky arcs through the gloom. The moment his hand hit the stairwell door, the monitors all cut to black at once. Silence slammed down like a hammer, sudden and suffocating. He froze, the cold metal handle under his palm, afraid to open the door and afraid to remain. Then came the sound, 3 sharp knocks, echoing from the other side of the door. The exact rhythm he had heard earlier through the intercom. Slow, deliberate, waiting that a shiver crawled up Daniel's spine. He wrenched the door open and charged through, barreling down the stairs again. His boots slipped on the concrete steps, nearly sending him tumbling headlong. The air was freezing now, each breath stabbing his lungs like ice. The stairwell lights flared once, then went out entirely, plunging him into blackness. He fumbled with his flashlight, the beam jerking wildly across the walls. In that beam, he caught glimpses of movement below, a flicker of a suit sleeve, the brief glint of polished shoes, then nothing. When the beam landed on the empty steps, Daniel's gut twisted. Mallory wasn't chasing from above anymore. He was waiting below. Desperate, Daniel shoved himself through the fifth-floor door, slamming it shut behind him. He leaned against it, chest heaving, ears straining for the faintest sound. This floor was darker than the last. No lights, no hum of electricity, just endless cubicles swallowed in shadow. His flashlight beam swept across them, but the further it reached, the more the darkness seemed to devour it, swallowing the light whole. He moved cautiously, ducking low, his footsteps muffled against the carpet. Each corner he turned felt tighter, as though the cubicles themselves were shifting to trap him in a maze. Then, from somewhere deep in the rows, he heard it, a chair creaking, slowly turning, followed by the faint scrape of footsteps. He whipped the light around, the beam catching only the edge of a cubicle wall. Another sound, papers fluttering, as if scattered by unseen hands. Daniel's panic mounted, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He broke into a run, weaving through the cubicles. The noises followed, dragging footsteps, chairs tipping, drawers slamming open and shut, building into a cacophony. He could feel it closing in, pressing him from every angle. Finally, he spotted a faint red glow at the far end of the floor, the exit sign above a stairwell door. Relief surged through him. He sprinted harder, lungs burning, every muscle screaming for him to stop. Just as his hand closed on the door's push bar, a reflection flashed in the glass pane set into the door. Not his own, but Mallory's faceless head, leaning inches from the glass, waiting on the other side. Daniel stumbled back, horror twisting his gut. The reflection's mouth opened wide, the glass trembling as a low, guttural scream rattled through it, shaking the entire frame. Daniel dropped his flashlight. The bulb shattered. Darkness swallowed everything. The assault darkness swallowed the fifth floor as the shattered remains of Daniel's flashlight rolled to a stop. The scream vibrating through the glass pane rattled his bones, its pitch so low it felt more like pressure in his skull than sound. He staggered backward, hands clamped over his ears, but the noise pressed on, as though Mallory was inside his head now, vibrating the very air in his lungs. Then, with a violent crack, the glass of the stairwell door splintered. Daniel watched in paralyzed horror as the distorted silhouette pressed through, not shattering, but bleeding out of the pane, stretching like ink spilling into water until Mallory stood fully in the hallway with him. Daniel's body finally obeyed the primal instinct to run. He tore down the cubicle rows, but Mallory didn't chase in any normal sense. Instead, with each blink, each flicker of the dim emergency light, Mallory was closer, appearing in the corners, leaning over desks, standing just feet behind him. Daniel could feel the air collapsing around him each time, colder, heavier, as though the figure's presence was sucking the life from the building itself. His lungs strained for breath. The overhead exit sign flickered in the distance again, but when he reached for it this time, the hallway seemed to stretch longer, endlessly, mocking his desperation. Drawers yanked open as he passed, scattering papers across his path. Chairs toppled in his wake, as though thrown by invisible hands. Then, suddenly, he was lifted off his feet. Daniel screamed as a crushing, unseen force slammed him against a cubicle wall, pinning him there. His ribs protested under the weight, the breath squeezed from his chest. His eyes darted wildly, and there Mallory was, only inches from his face. The hollow sockets where eyes should have been were now dripping a thick, black fluid that ran down his suit. The gaping mouth stretched wider than humanly possible, unhinged like a serpent, until it filled Daniel's vision. Stay. The word vibrated through the walls, the floor, his bones. The cubicle around him rattled, computer screens flickering on and off in sync with the voice. Daniel thrashed against the invisible grip, his lungs burning for air. At the edge of his fading vision, he spotted the glow of a security phone mounted on the far wall, one of the old hardwired emergency lines. Summoning every ounce of strength, he twisted, throwing his weight against the force holding him. With a guttural yell, he tore himself free and staggered toward the phone, slamming it off the hook. "Help! I need." His plea was cut short. The line wasn't silent, it was already active. And on the other end, a voice hissed back at him. Not panicked, not confused. Calm. Familiar. His own voice. "You can't leave, Daniel. You're already here." The line went dead. Behind him, Mallory's shadow stretched across the cubicles, swallowing the glow of the emergency lights as it closed in. The truth in the walls. Daniel staggered from the emergency phone, his pulse roaring in his ears. His own voice echoing through the receiver rattled him deeper than Mallory's attacks. He knew what he had heard. His voice, calm and resigned, as if mocking the frantic desperation he felt now. Every instinct screamed for him to run, but where? The building was no longer behaving like a place made of steel and glass. It was alive, bending and reshaping around Mallory's will. Desks shifted, doors vanished, hallways stretched impossibly long. The office wasn't just haunted. It was a cage. He ducked into another office, slamming the door shut behind him, though he knew locks meant nothing here. His flashlight gone, Daniel relied on the faint glow of emergency lights through the blinds. He pressed his back to the wall, chest heaving. On the desk lay another folder, identical to the one from the elevator. With trembling hands, he pulled it closer and flipped it open. This time, there were no blurred photographs. These were internal memos, confidential reports stamped with red ink. The first line made his blood run cold. Incident report. Death of Edward Mallory. Official cause, suicide by hanging. Location, 10th floor conference room. Daniel's eyes raced over the page. Mallory hadn't been just an employee. He was a whistleblower. The memos described how he had accused the company of fraud, embezzlement, unsafe working conditions. They branded him unstable, silencing him by forcing psychiatric leave. Weeks later, he was found dead in the building he had tried to expose. The official report listed suicide, but buried notes in the margins suggested otherwise. Signs of a struggle, inconsistencies in the rope marks, bruises that didn't match self-infliction. Mallory hadn't given up. He had been erased. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply. Daniel lifted his head, and there Mallory stood, inside the office, between him and the only door. This time he didn't flicker or dissolve. He was solid, towering, the air bending around him like heat haze. Daniel tried to speak, his voice breaking. I know what happened to you. I saw the files. They killed you, didn't they?" For a long, unbearable moment, the figure only stood there, head tilted, empty sockets locked onto him. Then Mallory's mouth moved, not the distorted gape, but the shape of real words. In a voice ragged and hollow, he whispered, "They stayed. Now you will too." The cubicle walls outside the office groaned, bending inward, twisting like flesh instead of drywall. Daniel felt the floor shift under his feet, the building folding in on itself. It wasn't just Mallory haunting this place. The entire structure was bound to his rage, warped into a prison for anyone unlucky enough to enter. Daniel realized, with a sick twist in his stomach, that Mallory wasn't seeking release. He was seeking company. The last shift. Daniel pressed himself against the wall of the office, the folder of Mallory's death report trembling in his hands. The warped walls outside groaned and bent like ribs closing around him. Mallory stood motionless between him and the door, hollow sockets locked onto him. Daniel's mind reeled with the truth. Mallory hadn't died by choice. He'd been silenced, covered up, buried under lies. The building wasn't just haunted. It was Mallory's tomb, twisted into a monument to his rage. And now Daniel was its next offering. He lunged for the blinds, yanking them open. Cold city lights spilled in, illuminating the office. For one fleeting moment, Daniel thought it might drive Mallory back. But the figure only grew sharper, more defined. Shadows spread from his feet like oil, spilling across the carpet and climbing the walls. Daniel stumbled toward the desk phone, desperate for outside contact. He dialed, hands trembling. The line clicked, but instead of a dial tone, the faint sound of his own voice answered. Daniel Reeves, security officer, found dead on premises. Cause, suicide. His blood ran cold. He dropped the phone, backing away, shaking his head violently. No, no, I'm not. I'm still here. But Mallory stepped closer, the air tightening with every movement. Daniel felt his chest constrict, his heartbeat slowing against his will. The folder pages whipped into the air, circling like leaves in a storm before slamming against the walls, pinning themselves there. Each page bore Mallory's name. And in the empty space where the photo should have been, Daniel's own blurred face stared back at him. He tried to run, but his legs buckled. The floor beneath him shifted, rising like quicksand, pulling him down. His hands clawed at the carpet, but it rippled under his grip, turning into something soft, damp, like soil. Mallory knelt over him, hollow eyes dripping with black tears, mouth stretching wide. The whisper came one last time, low and final. Stay. Daniel screamed as the darkness swallowed him whole, his voice vanishing into the walls of the building. The next morning, the office hummed back to life. Employees filed in, none the wiser. The security desk in the lobby sat empty, Daniel's logbook left open on the last entry. 10th floor door ajar, investigating. The folder from the elevator was gone, as though it had never existed. And on the 10th floor, behind a locked office door, the reflection in the window showed two figures now. A tall, faceless man in a suit, and a second shape beside him, trembling and blurred, caught forever in the glass.